Hey, Bob the Spider Hunter here for segment 5 on the Joro Spider. Today we're going to take one last shot at the Joro Spider, and I believe you're going to find this a little whimsical but also enjoyable because I'm going to do some teaching. And the idea here is we're going to go back and explore some folklore and see where the name the Joro Spider came from in the first place. It goes way back into ancient Japanese art and folklore. So without further ado, I'm going to take you to downtown, the West Side District, which is the historic district, and it's tulip time right now in Holland. But we're not there to see the tulips. We're there to go to the Kapan house and see some ancient history and take you into this old home that was built a long time ago in a different era. And there to begin this segment of the story is on the spot, Arthropod. Arthropod, take it away.
This is Arthropod reporting to you live from Holland, Michigan, the West District area. Now behind me stands the Isaac Kapan house. This house dates way back to the 1800s. And a family was raised here of 16 children. Isaac went on to be the first Holland mayor for 2 consecutive terms. And then with a business friend of his, they got together and formed the first leather tannery in Holland, a very lucrative and productive business. Shortly, I'll be going up to the house to see if we can meet with the curator of this museum home and get a little tour inside the famous Isaac Kapan house. But before we do that, I send you back to Bob.
Thanks, Arthro. We look forward to returning and taking that tour in the Kapan house. And the purpose is to take a look at a little bit of folklore, and I think we'll find some in that house. And we'll see if Arthro can discover some folklore, some scuttlebutt, if you will, that centers around the history of the Kapan house. Back to you, Arthro.
Thanks, Bob. Just before we enter into the Kapan house, just another few bits of information about this house. It has been fully restored back in the 1900s, and actually just again in the last 10 or 15 years. Now what they've done is they've restored the house to its original look back to the 1900s. Prior to that, there was only black and white pictures, so they couldn't really know what colors of paint, etc. were in the house. But they had information back in the 1900s. So they actually took pictures of the original wallpaper and had that reproduced and created to put on the walls. The furniture you find here is actually furniture from the Victorian era when this house was built. It's been kept or restored, and it's here for you to see today when the curator takes us inside. Shall we go? Wow. This is the Kapan house. Hello.
Hi there.
My name is Arthropod, and I'm doing a segment on the Isaac Kapan house.
Sure.
I'm interested in maybe just giving a little quick brief history of the place. Then I want to ask you if there's anything unique, stories, a little scuttlebutt about what happened in this house raising 16 children.
Sure. Yeah, why don't you follow me? We can get started in here. So this is our Capon house. Isaac Capon, he's really the quintessential American immigrant story. He came from the Netherlands. He was 17, he had a 4th grade education at the time. So he's really a self-made man. And he came and he opened up a tannery in the city of Holland. It's located where the Civic Center is now. And he built himself up from the ground up. He became a very wealthy man. This is an image of him here. He was first married to Katerina Capon, and they had 11 children. And then he had a second wife, and they had an additional 5. So in total, he had 16 children. This is his study. This is where he conducted a lot of his business. Yeah, and he was a person that really valued education, as you can see.
Is it true that Isaac built his first home prior to the Holland fire, and that was destroyed in the Holland fire, and then he built this home?
Yes, that is true. His business, his tannery, and his first family home was destroyed in the Holland fire of 1871.
Okay. What else can you show me?
Well, we can head this way, if you'd like. So this is our dining room space, and this is the area where the family would have had guests to eat or would have had their meals. And this was also a space that children were not allowed in until they reached a certain age. So once they turned about 5, they had good enough table manners that they could come and join the rest of the family. And when that happened, they were given their own silver napkin ring with their name on it.
Now, I heard that when they did some restoration, they actually used photographs to come up with the original wallpaper that was used and remade that and put that up. Is that true?
Yeah, well, if we look over here on this side of the wall, there's actually layers of wallpaper. And it wasn't uncommon during this period to wallpaper a house multiple times, and this house was built in 1874. This middle section here, they trace back to 1900, which was when this house is remodeled to look like, and they use that as a basis for the replica wallpaper in this space.
Very interesting. Now I gotta ask you this question. I heard a rumor, well, before I ask you that question, is it true that the Chicago fire was the same night that the Holland fire was? Is it true that embers were carried over Lake Michigan by the big winds and settled on Holland to start the Holland fire?
Unfortunately, that is not true. That is kind of a folk tale. What happened was there was a drought happening in the Midwest at the time, so the Holland fire and the Chicago fire, they did happen at the same time, in the same weekend. There are actually 3 other fires that happened the same weekend as well. So there were 3 in Michigan, 1 in Wisconsin, I believe, and the other was the Great Chicago Fire. Yep.
And I did hear that it wasn't Mrs. O'Leary's cow that knocked over the lantern. It turns out what I heard, it was 4 young men playing poker, got too liquored up, and they knocked over the lantern and blamed it on the cow.
Yeah, there's really no way to know for sure how the fire got started in the city besides the fact that there was a drought that happened. Unfortunately, there wasn't, news coverage at the time that was happening instantaneously, so all the stories came after the fire happened.
Now, what can you tell me about any scuttlebutt surrounding this historical house? Is there anything that sticks out that might be a little folklorish, contain something of folklore that may be of interest to my viewers?
Sure. So one of the funny stories about this house is Isaac Capon. He was married to Katerina, his first wife. She did pass away, unfortunately, from cancer. And then 4 years later, he did marry his maid. Jacoba was her name. She was also an immigrant from the Netherlands. And it wasn't super uncommon to marry, a maid after your first wife died or something like that. But what was really scandalous was the age difference, because Jacoba was only in her 20s at the time, and Isaac was already in his 50s or 60s. So there was a huge age difference between the two.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I appreciate you showing me part of the house. Have a great day, and I can't wait for my viewers to hear a little bit about the history of the Capon house and some of the great, interesting folklore that surrounds some of this house. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
certainly when you walk through the doors of this house, you take a step back into history. In this Victorian, beautiful home, I believe with the most of the furniture originally made here in Michigan. And this has been Arthropod reporting for you live for News Center 8. Back to you, Bob.
Enjoyed the tour, Arthur. Thank you so very much for introducing this segment to us. Not only did we learn a little about history, we learned a little bit about the Capon House, and we learned a little bit about the folklore that surrounds the Capon House. And now we're going to delve a little deeper into folklore as we examine the Joro Spider's name and where it originated. And it's just for us an abbreviation today. We call it the Joro Spider. It had a much longer name, and now we're going to find out what that looks like. To take us back and understand something of the folklore of this Joro Spider, we're going to make a contact, a person who knows something about the Japanese mythology, the Japanese folklore that surrounds this spider. And to do that, we're going to be making a phone call and trying to make a contact live with Miss Dual Kalishara. So let's try to make that phone call now. Bear with me.
Hello, Moto.
Hello. I'm trying to make a connection with a Miss Dual Kalishara. Can you help me make that call? Okay. Thank you.
こんにちは、ボブ。お元気ですか?
Miss Dual Kalishara, thank you for joining with us today. My viewers will, I'm sure, enjoy your historical background on the mythological background of the Joro Spider, and in particular the folklore that surrounds this spider that's ancient. So, without further ado, take it away. Give us some history about this spider.
Jorogumo, known in Japanese kanji or hiragana, is a type of yokai, a horrid creature of the Japanese folklore. According to some stories, the Jorogumo is a gigantic spider that can change its appearance into that of a seductive woman. In Japanese kanji, Jorogumo literally means binding bride or prostitute spider. The Japanese legend has it that a beautiful woman, who is Jorogumo in disguise, would entice a man into a quiet shack and begin to play a biwa, a type of Japanese lute. While the victim would be distracted by the sound of the instrument, she binds the victim in spider threads and devours the person in her true form as her nest meal. According to legend, when a spider turns 400 years old, it gains magical powers and becomes a Jorogumo. The Jorogumo is also known as the mistress of the Jorin Falls in Izu, Shizuoka, in Japan. Legend has it that a man was resting at the foot of the waterfall when his feet were bound with a vast number of spider threads. To free himself, he cut the threads and tied them to a tree stump, which was then pulled from the ground and drawn into the waters. After the incident at the Jorin waterfalls, the villagers became afraid and stopped going to the place. However, one day, a woodsman logger from out of town, unaware of the story of the Jorogumo, began cutting wood in that area. After he accidentally dropped his axe into the water, he dove into the pool to find it. Then, a beautiful woman appeared and returned the axe. The logger fell in love with the woman Jorogumo and started visiting the falls every day to see her. But as time passed, he started growing weaker and weaker. A monk from a neighboring temple believed the logger had been trapped by the spider, so he and the logger went to the waterfalls together, and the monk read a Buddhist sutra there. While reading the sutra, spider threads appeared from the pool and attempted to rob the logger, but the monk shouted his Buddhist chant and they disappeared. Though the logger realized that the woman was a spider, he still loved her. He asked for help from a tengu, master of the yokai, but the Tengu forbade his love. The logger, unwilling to give up his love for Joro, ran back to the waterfalls. He was wrapped by the silk threads and finally drawn into the water, never to be seen again.
Thank you, Miss Duo Kalisara, for the presentation you've given to us. We appreciate your help. Look, it's my twin trying to upstage me. I'm not going to let that happen. There, that's better. And now I'm going to take you back into some ancient times of Japanese folklore, where we see this little tiny name that we know as the Joro spider has a longer name known as the Joro. So, let's take a little step back into history. I'm going to put on my teaching hat and we're going to do a little teaching on Japanese folklore and history. You know, when it comes to the legend of the Joro spider woman, there's many stories that have come over the time periods in Japanese culture and literature, paintings and things such as that, that have a very similar story. And the story involves usually a handsome young man that this woman is interested in. And she draws him into her beauty, and he falls in love with her, or at least is infatuated with her. But the bottom line is always the same in every one of the stories. The young man finds himself invited to her home, her lair, and it's got spider webs all around it. And you know what? She invites him home for dinner. The problem is, he's the one on the menu, but he sees it too late and becomes her dinner. The term Jorogumo began to find its legend history in the Edo period of Japanese culture. That would be from 1603 to 1868. And then Jiroguma becomes more popularized when we move into the next period called the Meiji period. The Meiji period was between 1868 and 1912. This is where a Japanese folklorist comes onto the scene and begins writing about the Jorogumo legends. His name was Yanagito Kunio. And I probably messed that up big time. I'm not very good at pronouncing Japanese names. But he gave us flesh and blood to the Jorogumo spider, and the legends became more culturally now accepted. The prefix Joro in Jorogumo actually is translated prostitute. It is also known as the binding bride, the whore spider, the harlot spider, and the entangling bride, all from that same word. By the 17th century, there's a text that appears that tells us about a young samurai warrior. And the young samurai is being sheltered. He finds shelter in a home that is uninhabited, supposedly, as far as he thought, and yet a young, beautiful woman appears to him, and she brings out a child. And she claims the child is his. Well, he's not so sure of that, and he's actually very suspicious. And the woman just hangs around and hangs around with this child. And as time goes on, the child approaches the samurai many times. But as the child sees the samurai's sword, the child backs away and flees from the samurai. As time goes on, he's had it with this woman and this child, and out of anger and frustration, he pulls out his samurai sword. She sees it coming, turns to flee, and he slashes her across her back. The next morning, up in the attic of this home, he finds a 2-foot-long spider lying on the floor dying with an exact same slice across the spider's back that he gave to the woman. And then as he looks up, he sees above him, in webbing across the ceiling, the countless bodies encapsulated by spider webbing that this woman spider, this Joro, has dined upon. And these are some of the legends that occur in Japanese culture, folklore, writings, art, that give us a glimpse way back into history, how the little Joro name that we celebrate and use today in the United States and other Western countries, but in Japanese culture and in Japanese history, and probably even today, that spider is known as the Joro, or for short, Joro spider. And in Japanese culture, even today, they see the spider as kind of a little magical, gifted animal. So there you have it. There's the rest of the story on the Joro spider's name and how it got shortened from a very longer name that takes us way back into ancient culture and history. Okay, we've spent 5 sessions or episodes on the Joro spider. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And I always enjoyed this wonderful person who was an icon back in the 50s. His name was Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey would tell you a story. He'd make it very interesting. He pulled you into the story. And you knew that there was an ending coming that was either funny or that was unexpected or that it just catches you off guard. Paul Harvey was an awesome commentator, and he would always uniquely not only pull you into his story, but surprise you at the end. And he usually always closed off his stories by saying, "And now you know the rest of the story." Paul Harvey, good day. Paul Harvey, I miss hearing the man. What a great commentator. And that's how I choose to end this 5-episode news alert on the Joro spider, with the idea of Paul Harvey. And now we know the rest of the story as it concerns the name of the Joro spider. Hey, you might want to go back and watch them again and review. A lot of good info shared there. Hey, thanks for watching. Have yourself a great day. Take care.